Basically, let's just start with the definition, the nation state itself. Do you guys know the difference between the nation and the state?
Actually,
Um,
I haven't. Yeah, I haven't thought about that deeply.
It's actually really important, and I
Is
talk
the,
about
is
this in the
is the
book.
nation more kind of the cultural human side of things, and sort of the state more the protocol, like the rules, the constitution, the law making?
Yeah,
Is that sort of the
very close. That's right. So I mean, really, that's a good paraphrase. The nation, it comes from the same root word as natality, like common birth, common descent, like the Japanese nation. This is kind of a more old-fashioned way of talking about things, but you talk about this group that has common ancestry, culture, ethnicity, language, various characteristics, and then the state
almost like a
is
tribe?
it's a tribe. Exactly. That's right. Okay, now you can see the overlap, right?
or
So
perhaps a
nation is
yeah
like
online community. Yeah.
exactly. That's right. So you're there. All right. But the state is the administrative layer that this nation sets up. Okay. Now, there is a perennial argument that's actually very similar. So the argument over currency, as you probably are aware, is between the sort of for lack of a better term, I'm going to call them the libertarian progressive models, okay, because it's approximate. The libertarian model is that people started producing and then barter is how money arose, and it started with production, right? That is, a common model that you'll read in like various, libertarian texts, okay? The progressive model, like a David Graeber style model, says, oh, actually, no, that's a very independent kind of thing. Actually, money began with the state and with debts to each other, and that came first. And actually, everybody's kind of downstream of that, right? And there is an interplay between these two views, okay? I lean towards the barter model, but I agree that there are aspects of, for example, money only arises when there are two people. It's inherently a social phenomenon as opposed to an individual phenomenon, despite as individualist as money is. It's like language, right? You have to communicate with folks. So in a similar way, there's an argument, just like there's an argument about how currency arose. There's an argument or how the state arose. What came first, the nation or the state? Right? The people that gave rise to this administrative unit, or did the administrative unit create the people? At first, it seems totally obvious. Just like the libertarian model, it's like, well, how could you have the state come first? You have a people, it's a tribe, a primitive tribe or something, and then they start setting up some formal government and some laws or whatever. And, Code of Hammurabi, like, that's not totally primitive tribe, but like a written set of laws. That's like a state, and a bunch of guys to enforce them. Okay. How could the state come first? Well, when you look at nation formation, it's not quite that simple. For example, around the time of the French Revolution, most of the people in what we now think of as France did not actually speak French. They spoke various other dialects and languages. And it was the initial French-speaking group that invoked the sense of nationalism, built this powerful state that went and propagandized all of these people into speaking French and, basically imperializing them. Eric Hobsbawm talks about this. And similarly, if the thing we think of as Germany, that's a Bismarck creation. The thing we think of as Italy, that's a creation of Garibaldi, right? These are giant unifications where the state, in a sense, did create the nation of the people we think of as German or Italians or French, and who think of themselves as German or Italian or French, right? So there is an interesting feedback loop between the nation and the state. Even if I would argue the nation comes first, I agree that there is a ladder here, right? The state can create the nation and vice versa. Just like I agree that there is an interplay between the libertarian and progressive theories of money, okay? Now, why do I bring all this up? Well, it's of, I think, extreme importance to crypto people because if the question of the 2010s was, what is a currency? I think the question of the 2020s will be, what is a nation? Okay? What is a legitimate nation that is both deserving of and capable of some degree of self-determination? Okay? And we think of the question of what is a currency. Now you can rattle off the definition of a currency. You can rattle off. It's like medium exchange, store of value, unit of account. We've all seen that. Most people could not rattle that off in the late 2000s. Why have we had to rattle that off? Because the constant of, the US dollar as a currency, and obviously that's not something you can innovate on, became a variable. Suddenly there's USD and BTC, and now USD, BTC, ETH, blah, 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 all this long list of things, right? And when a constant becomes a variable, all the certainties, especially something that's a really deep constant, when that becomes a variable, all the certainties go away, right? There's a huge time of chaos, volatility, upside and downside, blah, blah. And one constant that's becoming a variable is the concept that America is a quote nation state. It's not. It arguably never was, but it definitely isn't today. It's at a minimum binational, where there's two groups that literally don't intermarry anymore. Democrats only marry Democrats, right? So that's the thing is, people are, it is progress. Yes, in a sense, it's progress, of course, that folks will marry across, racial boundaries, religious boundaries, and so on. But you know where they don't marry across? They don't marry across party boundaries. So you know what happens in like one generation? Ideology becomes biology.
Ooh.
Democrat, Republican becomes like Sunni Shiite, right? And you just go back to the future. It becomes a tribal thing where it's literally biology. Like this people they're the bad folks and you don't marry them. And like racism returns in a sense, right? Because it becomes like, it becomes biological. It'll take some time for that to iterate out. Don't get me wrong. Okay. But you're in the process of that. We're talking like 80, 90% of people. It's like very strong, like, taboos on this now, right? So when you have a binational state, that's a recipe, either for a crackdown or for like a Yugoslavia, Bosnia type situation where you have a bunch of different nations that are angling for control of the state. That's a recipe for conflict. In fact, the entire concept of the nation state was the idea that each nation gets its own territory and its own laws so that each guy in a box or whatever, right? That's the ideal abstraction. That abstraction is actually not typically reached. Japan is the largest, probably single nation state out there. China or India are not really nation states, they're civilization states because there's many different ethnicities, especially within India. China is more monoethnic. You can argue the Han are like 90 something percent, right? But they also do have lots of different ethnicities in there, lots of different regional tensions and stuff. But many other countries are really multinational states. And the opposite of a nation state in a different sense is the concept of the stateless nation. Okay. So can you name a stateless nation? You ever heard that term?
A stateless nation. So this would be sort of a group of people, Palestinians, possibly.
Okay, right. That's the most famous, right? But you could take, the Kurds. You could take the Catalonians. Some of the Armenians, the Basques, right?
Mormons.
These are folks.
Mormons in Utah.
Arguably, yeah. You could. You could. They're certainly influential in the Utah government. But yes, you could. That would be something you could think of potentially as a stateless nation. And in fact, one way of thinking about the world is once you start actually really putting a magnifying glass on that word nation, right? You see some really interesting things. For example, the term multinational really should be like multi-state or multi-jurisdictional, because it's not like this company is interfacing with, all these nations of people. It's not like doing a deal with the Catalonians and the Basques and so on. It's doing a deal with the Spanish government, right? So it's multi-state, multi-jurisdiction rather than multi-nation. The reason for this is, you also hear terms like national security or, it's a national matter. National has to mean all of us, right? When it's really, you might call it federal. It's a bit of a misnomer, right? Because it's this is the state using language to try to make the nation and the state the same, okay? Which I understand, it kind of helps with legitimacy, but it's also a stolen base. And another version of this, which is actually quite important, is the United Nations. Really, we should think of it as the selected states, because most nations are not in the United Nations. There might be like 600 legitimate nations in the world. The Kazakhstani president recently said, if all the nations of the world were able to get self-determination, nation in the sense of the Japanese nation, the Catalonians, if all the nations of the world were able to have self-determination, we'd have 600 countries in the UN, not 190 something.
Right. Yeah, I think there would be a lot of African tribes that would be unaccounted for in a nation-state model.
Yeah, whenever you see lines, like straight lines on a map,
Yeah.
that is almost never what like actually reflects what the ethnic groups and language and history and culture was. It's an imposition by the British. Now, as I said, the state can create a nation. So, there's this famous graph of like search queries in the US for for baseball teams, right? It's a paper, I think it came out of Yahoo Research in like 2005 on like geocenters. Okay. I can bring it up. Let me see if I can bring this up. Okay, here we go. This is an amazing, amazing figure that I'm just going to try to zoom in on. Okay. So this is from like 17 years ago. All right. And so these are queries from, of different sports teams. Okay.
Right.
And you can see that like this is the group of people who are Brewers fans, and this is the group of people that are Cubs fans. And
Okay,
on and
so
forth.
Balaji, I'm going to commentate for the listeners out there. We are
Sure.
looking at what is almost a map of the United States. However, there is no actual drawings of the sea or ocean. There's no drawings of the states. There's only dots, but you can see the outline of the United States just because it's like a population map, right? Like people sort of outline in a pseudo way the actual physical landscape of the United States, but there's only dots, and these dots are different colors based off of what team that they are on. So my team of choice, the Seattle Mariners, happens to be this white in the upper left corner of the United States. You have the Chicago Cubs, which is where you'd expect around Chicago. You got the Houston Astros around Houston. You got the San Diego Padres around Southern California, but you don't actually see the state of California or like the city of San Diego or any particular line. You just see these masses of dots that are around their respective probably sports stadiums. Would be like
These are the baseball tribes.
baseball tribes.
Yes. But here's what's interesting. You can sort of see some state boundaries there. Like if you look at the Tigers, right, versus the Cubs, you can kind of see like the boundary
that's a
between
pretty clear
Michigan,
line. Yeah.
right? There's a pretty clear line. So this is an example of where like the social construct of these sports teams and these states is in the minds of these people. It's installed software in the minds of these people. And so the lines on a map have become reflected in the software installed in people's heads.
So this is one of those cases, which comes first, the nation or the state? And the answer to